Magic is an exciting part of Dungeons & Dragons or any role-playing game. But there's a couple things that you need to be aware of before you just allow for any sort of magic willy-nilly to be played in your game. First things first, you need to be aware that although magic is powerful and it adds a lot of excitement to the game, it also can begin to derail core mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons. Now, oftentimes you'll see these three things here. These are sometimes considered the three pillars of Dungeons & Dragons, or the three pillars of role-playing games, and they're as follows. First up, we have combat. Now, combat's going to be anything. It can be fighting, rolling dice, seeing if your attack hits, do you miss. It can be shooting a bow or crossbow. It can be sneaking up on the enemy and backstabbing them if you're the rogue. But anytime that you roll for initiative, that would be considered combat. And that makes up a huge portion of the game. More than half of the Dungeons & Dragons rulebook is dedicated just to combat alone. So it's incredibly important to at least Wizards of the Coast. Next up, we have exploration. Now, exploration is something that happens basically in between these two things. Exploration is kind of like this halfway point between these two areas where there might be combat, or it might lead to social interaction, or it can lead to something that I think is extremely important, and that is discovery. Right? Discovery, or that sense of discovery, means that you as a player feel like your character has done something cool. They've discovered a new thing, they've uncovered a trap, they've found deep in the forest a rock that was partially covering up a cave, and when you go inside it leads to this huge subterranean area. Most games are going to start off with social interaction. You meet in a tavern, a bar, a pub, whatever. It's then often going to lead to you going on to a bit of exploration to find where your quest will take you, and then finally it will finish with combat. And that is your very, very simple sort of gameplay. But I would propose that there's a couple things that are often forgotten that can kind of mix in with these three pillars, but also stand alone as well. Number one is story, right? The story is something that is created by the Dungeon Master. So your Dungeon Master, Game Master, whatever you want to call them, they are the person who writes the story. Now, they write the outline of the story, what they believe, what they want to happen, or at least how they want it to start. And then the players, you, are going to go out and actually make the story. So your Dungeon Master might have 300 pages worth of interesting and awesome story to play, but if the players decide that they want to stop and chase chickens around the starting town for 3 days to receive a 5 gold quest reward, then the story is going to go kind of out the window, and I'm sure your Dungeon Master or Game Master is not going to be super happy with you. But that does lead to our final thing here, character development. Now, character development can and does often go with story, because your Dungeon Master or Game Master sets out the story and you set out your character. So that's going to be your background, your flaws, what you're good at, what you're bad at, your skills, everything like that. So while the DM writes the story, the players make their character development happen. Now, that's going to be through roleplay. It's also going to be through a little bit of discovery. And lastly, it can be done through combat. Now, these things are all going to be connected, right? Oftentimes, the DM or GM is going to create the story, and all of these things here, combat, exploration, and social interaction, are going to be created in with it. Character development can also happen in any of these things here. So this is a web of things that are interconnected. Combat often comes from exploring comes from roleplay, and of course all of that lumped together is going to come from the Dungeon Master or Game Master's story. But what I want to talk about today is what I think is the most important thing that gets overused and overutilized, that kind of throws a wrench into all of this. Magic. I think that magic is way too overdone in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or really a whole lot of fantasy role-playing game systems. And I'm not saying that we need to get rid of magic or take it away or throw it out the window, but what I am saying is that it should be better done. Now, magic oftentimes leads to an over-reliance on itself. So when you have a magic user, they are going to use magic for, let's say, combat. Because why wouldn't they, right? Magic is going to be more powerful than anything that a melee user can use without magic weapons, right? Magic will always end up being more powerful at the cost of the player characters are often going to be a lot squishier and weaker, right? Oftentimes magic users have less HP in combat, but they deal more damage, so they sit back, they launch all these ranged spells out at the enemy. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but what it does mean is that there's always a 100% optimized way to play combat. And so you never have to think about, well, should I do option number 1? Should I maybe do option number 2? Or perhaps option number 3? Or perhaps option number magic? Yeah, I think I'm going to pick magic. It's the most powerful, so that's what I'm going to go with. So you never have a reason to do any other thing in combat other than use your magic. Which means that your imagination, your role-playing, and really any of those things that make your creativity sort of show up and show out are going to be gone. Magic is also going to be heavily used in exploration, right? Just like we talked about before, with exploration you can use find this, or within 100 miles, is there evil nearby, or detect this, or find that. And it kind of takes out your ability to actually think with your human brain, with the player brain, instead of the character. And so it takes away a lot of your, again, creativity. How am I going to go find this? Where am I going to find that, right? Again, instead of going through all those different options, you are instead just going to go back to option number magic, because again, it is going to be more powerful. In humans, we are creatures that want to find the most efficient way to do things. So if these all eventually lead to the path, but they're kind of are a little bit loopy, and the magic just gives us a straight shot through all of the bull crap, then of course that's going to be the option that we take, right? It's in our nature to do so. And lastly, it's going to be interfering with RP, right? With role play, with social interactions, because guess what? Charm, right? And I get it, not every magic class has access to charm, but for example, the Bard, very famous example, but there's a lot of other ones too that have the ability to charm, and with that, your need to roleplay is gone. You just cast charm. Okay, well, do they succeed in their check? Looks like they rolled a 10 plus their, yeah, I think they fail. So you go ahead and you charm them, and now you don't have to roleplay anything. The scenario is basically all in your hands. And it takes that away from the rest of the party and from what the DM created for their story. Now, the story is something that you work with the Dungeon Master to create. It's not something that they write out for you and you have to follow it word for word. That would be a book, not a role-playing game. But when you take their story that they've meticulously crafted out and you toss magic into the mix, then it gets all mashed up, put behind bars, and instead what comes out is the most efficient and the best possible 100% optimized version of how you should complete this story. And unfortunately, in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, every single class, other than barbarians, have access to magic. I might be wrong on that, but let me just read these out. Clerics, warlocks, wizards, artificers, bards, rangers, druids, paladins, sorcerers. They all have access to magic. You also have fighters with the Eldritch Knight, rogues with the Arcane Trickster, monks with the Way of the Shadow and the Way of the Four Elements. So all of these different classes have access to magic in some way, basically other than the barbarian, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some random class that's out there, but almost all of the base classes from just standard D&D have access to magic either innately or through a subclass. And when they have that, it is going to mean that instead of using your brain, instead of using your faults, instead of using what your character is good or bad at, instead they're simply going to roll up the magic and just have that done very quick, very instantaneously, and remove a lot of that story and put it behind bars and just take that most optimized route. Now, yes, magic is a lot more fun than saying in combat, okay, I swing my sword. I hit. Pass turn. But although magic is more fun than that, it also does something else. It makes combat take forever. I don't know if you've played a game of Dungeons & Dragons recently, but combat turns drag out. They can take anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes per turn, and when you're spending that across 5 to 6 players over the course of 15 rounds of combat, I mean, we're talking almost an hour of combat to fight off, a basic horde of enemies. And when every single class has access to magic in some way, that only increases the amount of time per turn, and therefore your combats take forever. Your players get checked out, they get bored, they pull out their phones, they start scrolling, or they, start side conversations over here, and they're not focusing on the game at hand. So how do we fix this? Well, the number one way to fix this is going to be to condense down all of these magic classes into just a couple. So I know this is going to be a hot take. It's a very, very hot take, but what I'm saying is you condense these magic users down. Paladin, Cleric, Warlock, Druid, and Ranger all get their magic from a deity of some sort, or a elder creature, or anything like that. Paladins and Clerics, pretty much the exact same class, other than, the kind of spells. So there's literally no difference there. Warlock, I've already mentioned it before, but I believe that Warlocks are essentially the same as a Cleric. Yes, there are minor differences, but what I'm telling you is in-game, for the way that the mechanics work, there's no difference. Druids, they get their powers from some sort of nature spirit. Another word for spirit? A deity or a god. And then finally, Rangers, the small amount of spells that they do get access to, very, very similar to the Druids, which is then, again, linked in with here. So all of these are getting their powers from either gods or nature, like spirits. So we can just lump those all into one single class. How about here? Wizard and Sorcerer. Literally no difference. Yes, the Wizard knows how to control their spells and the Sorcerer doesn't. Well, congratulations. You can roleplay that or talk about it with your Dungeon Master. They don't need to have a separate set of spells. They don't need to have separate rules in-game. If you want to run something like that, just make your Wizard and then purposely nerf him. What about the Bard and the Artificer? Neither of them really get their magic from a magical source. The Bard kind of uses inspiration and music to get their magic, which I would play it as, personally, if it were me in my game. That's not magic. You're just inspiring them, and they get an additional, D4, and they're now inspired from your lovely lute tunes. So the Bard, I would not say, in my games, needs to even have magic. Same thing with the Artificer. It's not magic. You're creating things using a science of sort, and there's no gods involved. It's not really interacting with the magical weave per se. So let's say that these are also no difference, right? And then what about the ones that can get it through subclasses? Fighters, rogues, and monks. Well, how about this? They don't get access to magic, right? It's very, very simple. A fighter is a fighter. They want to have Eldritch Knight? Okay, well then how about they multi-class into something like being a Cleric, or perhaps being a Wizard? What about the Rogue? The Rogue doesn't need magic, right? They're already sneaking around. They're doing a million times damage on sneak attacks. They don't need magic. Monks have access to key points, which I find interesting, and I think is similar to magic, but not, and I think that's plenty enough, so they don't need anything separate. So let's just go ahead and get rid of those here. So what we've done is we've broken this down into from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, however many classes there are. We've broken it down into about 3. In reality, I would say actual magic users, we've broken it down into 2. Simplify the game down, right? Stop giving so many options for your players, because here's the deal. Creativity is bred by restrictions. When you have restrictions on things, it makes your players think outside of the box. So if they're inside the box and this is all they can do, instead of the gigantic, huge set of rules that they have access to, right? Now they have all of this to choose from, and they'll never find something that works perfectly. But in here, right, it's pretty easy to find some fun things to do. And then sometimes, maybe, you can think outside the box here and pull something from out of here and use it, right? And that might make you more successful. But you don't have to worry about all of this extra nonsense that they have access to. Just give them something small and simple and concise, and then let them use their creativity, their imagination to step outside that box and figure it out for themselves. They'll feel more accomplished for it. It's them doing the work, not the player's handbook, not Wizards of the Coast, and not Hasbro. Y'all have a good day.